Good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to thank Robert, thank the Society, but most especially I'd like to thank all of you in attendance here. Churches are something that are very special to our firm, to me individually as an architect, and so it's always good to expand and share some information that may help you with your congregations. Cummings and McCrady is a firm that's been in Charleston since 1957. And although I've got a lot of gray hair, I haven't been there that long. I've been with them for 27 years and have been able to work on a number of church projects of various sizes. During our history, we've worked on some 65 church projects and still counting. And we have been able to serve the client's needs of some 10 different denominations. There are certain commonalities to it. Every project has its challenges, but they also have their opportunities. So what I'm going to do this morning is spend just a few minutes to talk with you about some of the planning parameters. But then I'm going to quickly get into more of the fun stuff that's near and dear to me as an architect, and talk about some of the things that were vital in two very important projects that we did in Charleston recently. And they demonstrate some of the unique things and how some opportunities came to serve those congregations during the course of the work. I'm going to ask a show of hands. How many people here have worked with architects on church projects before? Great, great. For those of you who haven't, I don't want you to be baffled or bewildered by some of the things that I might show. Feel free to ask questions at any time. Keep in mind, these are typically long-range projects that take a lot of intense cooperation among everybody on the team. And that is vital to its success. It doesn't happen overnight. This city didn't happen overnight. The beautiful churches that we have didn't happen overnight. And so their preservation and their consideration is central to all of the things that make them vibrant parts of our city. I'm going to start at the very beginning. This looks simplistic, but as a church community, individually, there are three key things that I think we all need to internally determine about a church project. What is the purpose of the project? What is it you want to do for your congregation? Do you need more space? Do you need to improve how it functions? Have your ministries changed over the course of time? That the facilities no longer work best for you? And they could be improved? Are they simple physical upgrades? You all need to think and have a good internal organization about what your objective is for the project. When? Okay? Do you have critical functional needs that will determine a schedule? Some of our church projects involve schools. And as we all know, schools have schedules that are not flexible. They're going to open on a certain date. Churches that don't have school facilities or components may have other considerations, religious celebrations that they want to be able to coordinate with the dedication of a facility or the rededication of a facility. Okay? Something to think about. And also plug into that phasing. You may have long-range plans and perhaps a physical master plan, but how do you implement that? More often than not, it requires consideration of how you're going to phase a project. And then the third W, who? How is your church structured that you would enter a project? Do you have strong clergy leadership? Does the clergy respond to direction from a board of trustees or session or parish council? All churches have committees. You know, maybe there's an ad hoc committee that's established for your church project. One point I would like to emphasize, because church projects can be long-term, long-range, take a lot of involvement, that who needs to address continuity. The people at the beginning of the project who help shape the program for what your physical solution is going to be need to maintain their involvement so the project doesn't get sidetracked. You don't want an architect to come and give you a beautiful building that doesn't serve your needs. That doesn't do any good for anybody. The continuity of the church participation I find to be central to the success of a project. Okay. Before you get concerned, after this I'm going to get to a lot of nice pictures, okay? But here are a lot of factors that should be considered in church projects. Not everyone is going to come and be relevant on every single church project. But there's a great deal of planning that has to go into the project. It's not just you as members of a church deciding you want to do something and you can go ahead and do it. As the mayor mentioned, there are zoning ordinances, and they are replete with all kinds of information that's vital to them. So what I've done is list various aspects, various factors for y'all to consider in a church project from my perspective as a planner and an architect. Churches are wonderful repositories of historical documents. Many of the churches we work with have been able to give us copies of plans of their buildings, or earlier buildings that became their churches. Your archival information is vital. So I urge you to continue to keep it and maintain it. It's not just that rolled up, dusty set of crinkled blueprints that you got stuffed in a corner somewhere. They can be vital when you come to initiate a project. All of the minutes and everything else that you keep can help identify what's been considered in the past and help shape that future. In Charleston, there are a whole host of historical resources, and that's the essence of our preservation planning efforts. We all know about the Sanborn insurance maps and how they can trace the history of sites, okay? But you also have a lot of other entities. In Columbia, Department of Archives and History, the SHPO, State Historical Preservation Office, great resources for you. And of course now you're seeing more and more information online. The main library in the Carolina Group has great resources available. What else do we have? Of course, societies such as the Preservation Society, South Carolina Historical Society at the Fireproof Building. The College of Charleston has a wonderful collection. A lot of this resource material can help you in your project or help your team make a better project. Congregation, I had an interesting event a few years ago when I went up to a church in Greenwood to help them assess their original sanctuary. Wonderful, wonderful Richardsonian Romanesque building. On the top of a hill, you know, one of these buildings, you may know Trinity Church in Boston. Really robust looking structure, great architecture, asymmetrical, these heavy columns, a lot of nice stonework and so forth, and a very prominent tower. Well, at this church I was asked to look at the building because there were concerns on the church's part. And this tower was only half high, and I could never figure it out. It was on the campus that had other buildings added to it. And no one could identify, I could find no research as to why this tower, which had to have been and was documented as having been the prominent vertical point of the original sanctuary, no longer existed. Somebody finally spread the word, and I was able to meet an 85-year-old gentleman in the church who knew exactly why that tower was gone. When they added a new sanctuary in the 1950s, the pastor said that there cannot be two spires on a church in which he will preach. So they took it off. That solved my problem of not trying to search for a structural failure as to why the building was in the current shape. So don't overlook your congregation members and their histories. City zoning ordinance. It's online, but I would strongly suggest any efforts quickly involve the city staff, the zoning staff. Penny and Lee Batchelder over there can provide great insight. The zoning ordinance, of course, in this city where we have a lot of churches in residential neighborhoods, has all kinds of tables and requirements, lot coverage, limitations on building heights, setbacks, and so forth, okay? Very important items that need to be factored in when you consider what you want to do with your church property. In particular, lot coverage. But perhaps the most important, the next to the last, special exception. Churches in residential neighborhoods in Charleston are special exceptions. They have unique setback requirements. I don't know if there's a church in town that meets them. And what that means is what that means is the Board of Zoning Appeals for zoning is going to be on the agenda. You go to them to explain and show the situations that you have, the conditions that you have. But you need variances. So special exception within the zoning ordinance is crucial for church projects. Okay? You also have buffer requirements that are part of that for parking and so on and so forth. Okay? We all know about the flood zone, the FEMA maps. Okay? One of the projects we worked on, we had to raise the floor of a building that we were renovating 1 foot because of the extent of the renovation to comply with the flood maps. Okay? It's important to understand your site well. You all have been living and breathing and working at your churches for years. But to see it on a survey, to understand what you might have in terms of easements, setbacks, the flood zone determination, where utilities are, where street access is, and so forth, are all vital factors to make sure that you're clear on. You know, where are the property lines? Does it include this brick fence or not? Or does it share a wall with another building? Of course, the neighborhood associations can be great resources, and certainly in this town, as good neighbors, you want to speak with your neighbors, share your plans at the appropriate time to solicit input, and share them with the neighborhood associations, because they will be represented at those necessary hearings, the public hearings that are part of the project. Okay? Recently, the city adopted the 2012 building code, but just as importantly, there's a 2012 International Existing Building Code. And this sets up different levels of alterations to buildings that in fact impose legal requirements on what you must do for life safety of those buildings. Okay? Historical buildings have all sorts of permissions and associated latitudes given to the building official to enforce the codes. Okay? Never overlook that. Historical buildings can be shown through the design process to satisfy the intent of life safety of a code, but perhaps not in its very, very strictest interpretation. So this authority having jurisdiction, those interpretations from the building inspections department over in the city can be very important. You want to get them out up front. You want to go through those things up front. And then you should have a survey of what your facility is. Do you know you have problems? Do you think you have problems? Do you need somebody to investigate concerns because you see symptoms? And that could well involve looking at the building envelope. It's a nice term architects use to talk about the roof, the walls, and so forth. Okay? Is it intact? Does it need help? Are there special areas that require attention? Are you having a lot of water intrusion problems? Or are you having structural failures? You may need a structural engineer to look at the integrity of it, especially if you want to reconfigure internally. You may want to do something to address sustainability concerns for your church, or handicapped access. Okay? A lot of the congregations are making efforts to go in that direction to improve the viability of their buildings. All right, so this is something of a checklist. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Not everything here is going to relate to your projects, but try not to overlook some of these things because you don't want to have that gotcha moment when you have a set of plans and the building official says, oh no, I'm sorry, I can't give you the permit because you haven't done some of these other things. Now I'm going to get on, I'm going to show you some aspects of two projects that we worked on. Yes?
Do you have a copy of that last list you went through with the church?
I don't have it with me, but I will certainly provide it to the society, and you're certainly welcome to that. Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to get on into showing a few pictures of some aspects of two major projects that we worked on in downtown Charleston. Okay, and on the left, of course, St. Michael's at the Four Corners, and then First God's Presbyterian, just a little bit down the road. We worked on St. Michael's Sanctuary right after Hurricane Hugo. And several years later, they needed additional space because of their growing congregation and their ministries and so forth, and they had outgrown what they were in with their parish hall. So I'm not going to talk about the sanctuary work there. I'm going to talk about the parish hall because I think there are some lessons and some obvious points here. This series of slides is part of what we did to trace the history because of where we were suggesting the design solution could go. So these were some shots that we used at one of the BAR presentations, going back to the earliest days when we could trace through historical research what the lot size was for the church. And of course at the bottom of the page is Meeting Street, on the left-hand side is Broad Street, okay, and that dark rectangle is the sanctuary itself. So you see some of the notes on these, and I'm going to flip through them quickly because we were tracing the development of the site through historical records. Okay. Expansion of the property, further expansion of the property, and then you see there's the structure over on the right-hand side along St. Michael's Alley, that corner of the tenement. And then prior to 1880, it was identified on a document as a Sunday school. We were able to confirm that it had been added on to. And then at the top of the page, this was a Sunday school that was added. They had acquired the property, removed what was there. Simmons and Lapham, a famous firm here in Charleston, 1924, did 6 sheets of drawings for this entire building, some 12,000 square feet. And that expanded their facilities, and they connected to the existing. 1959, the church undertook a project because that old Sunday school needed to be replaced. So this is a shot during the construction. There's the Simmons and Lapham building in the background. So the 1959 replacement in the same footprint, but they also expanded the building at that time. They were encroaching into the churchyard. That was the central point of what we were trying to trace through this historical research. Our solutions were affected midstream in this project because the church was able to acquire this building on Broad Street. It was a commercial 2-story building. And so while the church was desperately looking for space, and that was part of our program, the church was able to purchase this building. So that solved 2 things. Immediately got them 4,000 square feet additionally, but it also enabled them to move their offices from the existing hall into that, so the church administration could continue to function, and the contractor could renovate a hall without interference. So a very, very good opportunity that occurred during the course of the project. It wasn't there at the beginning. It wasn't there at the beginning, okay? So the connections were made between the 2 buildings and the space that had been acquired because the property line used to be just on the north side of the building right here. So this became available. So that changed what our design solution was. We renovated the other floors and so forth, and then these were the drawings that we had to take to the BAR to show them that we were in fact preserving the character of those earlier buildings. Of course, we were upgrading it for mechanical systems, functionality, elevator, kitchen, and so on and so forth. And in all of these shots, what we did was to show proposed compared to existing. We remove the stack, and there's your little elevator shaft. Okay. Separation, brick fence created between that and the neighboring parking lot. Okay. But again, these were all part of what was done in a very, what I believe to be a very, very successful project. And then, of course, all of the interior spaces were renovated as well. And the exterior creates a wonderful space between the two buildings. So we didn't expand 1 foot of building in this project. Okay. Now I'm going to switch over to First God's Presbyterian Church. We had done work with the church on several different smaller aspects, but that congregation came to the conclusion internally that they needed more space. Of course, they have the historic sanctuary, but they had other facilities that were built in the 1950s, and they were outgrowing them. They had acquired land piecemeal, so the configuration of their parcel was very, very irregular. So internally, they felt they needed space. So we assisted them in developing a program. We interviewed their staff, we gave them the questionnaires, we examined their facilities, how are they used, and so forth. And then we did a master planning exercise that looked at their entire parcel. So these are almost cartoonish studies to take the program and to test it on the site. Okay? For those of you not familiar with First God's, this fronts on Meeting Street, and this is Trad, and on the west is King Street. Okay? And yes, the parcel is that irregularly shaped. Okay? Challenging. So these were cartoons to show simple master planning studies or what ways are available to use this land for their purposes. Combining buildings, separating buildings, and so forth. Okay, again, maintaining absolute respect for the most historic building, the sanctuary. Okay. So these are just quick little studies, how the traffic flows, how site utilization could be. Okay. This happened to be one of the drawings that I utilized when we went before the Board of Zoning Appeals for zoning to address some of those special exceptions. Okay, churches are required to have 25-foot setbacks from a property line. 25-foot setbacks from a property line in downtown Charleston. Think about that. Okay. So, here's the parcel. And hatched, you see the existing building, because the decision was made that we should tear down the hall. We should renovate this 2-story addition that was built at the time of the hall, and then build a larger hall. We were required to retain this existing residential structure, which the church had acquired. Some of our master plans had looked at moving that building. And when that got to BAR, that came to a screeching halt. It wasn't going to move. That's a challenge. There's a challenge, okay? So, some of the features here that we talked about dealing with the zoning ordinance. What were we going to do with the trees? We had to mitigate a couple of trees that we wanted to take down. We had to deal with the setbacks, so we had to get variances, okay? The Nathaniel Russell House is on this parcel immediately adjacent to the south. They did not want us to do anything in the playground. They just flat said, we don't want you to build in that playground. So I've got solution after solution as I retreat from that property line. But it all worked out. The church originally wanted a smaller project and develop a bigger project later. The church originally wanted to phase it. Well, this was the proposed solution for the first phase and retaining the original, the 1954 hall and the admin building. Well, that ran into some flack, okay? The final solution was to renovate the admin building, and this is where we had to raise that ground floor to comply with flood ordinance. We had to raise the floor 1 foot. And then build a new hall. Now, if I can, this is the animation. Catherine, can you help me? Oh, here it is. Excuse me. I'm going to show you what we did as a very effective tool to communicate the design intent to the neighbors, to the neighborhood association, and then to the respective boards at the city. We developed the background of this site, going out field measuring and creating the computer-aided geometry of all of the surrounding buildings. And we then went and developed this animation and showed this at the respective board meetings. This area will fly around the entire parcel. It was extremely difficult. I could see it in people's faces to show exactly what our building design was going to be with so many other structures in the foreground. On virtually all sides, there were structures in the foreground. So here was a great opportunity to share a design tool to explain a design intent. We supplemented this aerial with ground level views on all 4 of the streets. So we used animations to show what our project would look like. If you were on Meeting Street, walking north, looking west, there's a Nathaniel Russell house, and you progress up to the corner of Trad. You turn down Trad and you head west towards King, but you look south at our project, so you could see. And we did the same thing on King Street, and then we came back on the alley. So these animations were wonderful tools to show the intent of what we wanted to do. So just some opportunities where some technology can really help. And I think it was a very successful solution. This being the finished product, and yes, I'm on the roof of the Nathaniel Russell house. So, with that, those are some of the pictures that are more fun to look at, to explain and so forth. You know, I cautioned Robert, I said it's always a dangerous thing to give an architect a microphone in an audience. But with that, I will certainly make that particular sheet available through the society, and I hope it serves you all well. Questions? Okay, thank you. Sure.
A big part of that review process is preservation. Talk a little bit about how the congregation and how you guys, as the neighbors, are in a very tight historic environment. That was a long process. You guys did a good job.
It was an incredibly long process, and it starts at a smaller circle and then continues to expand. In Charleston, this is vital. There are so many resources out there that it is vital that you as church owners, if you will, just as the mayor said, understand the neighbors, okay? So with, for example, St. Michael's, there was a group of St. Michael's Alley residents who got together and went knocking on the church's door and said, we want to be part of this discussion. So we had several meetings with them and then expanded to the Charlestown Neighborhood Association and showed what our various options were, what our considerations were. And of course the congregation meetings were in there as well. First Scott's was very similar, perhaps because it was an addition, it involved even more interfacing with the respective groups. We had the different ministries within the church. We had their committees. We had immediate neighbors, some of whom, would taking different stands on different design approaches. But there was this engaging process where we shared drawings, lots of meetings, public meetings, so that people could freely discuss what their concerns were. What are you going to do with the school? How tall is this going to be? How is it going to affect me? I mentioned the meeting at Nathaniel Russell House in the Charlestown Historic Charleston Foundation had very, very strong feelings about what First Scots Presbyterian was going to do in its playground. A whole series of meetings there, and design option after option after option. We took these to, met with zoning people, met with BAR staff. And again, this process, dealing and working with the societies, the Preservation Society and Historic Charleston Foundation, sharing things with them before we go and make formal applications to the Board of Zoning Appeals for zoning. A word to the wise, make sure you do your homework and you involve all of these important resources before you go and ask for a formal legal variance or approval, okay? Only after you obtain all of those zoning considerations are you going to go to the BAR, and Dennis is going to explain more about that. But it's essential. It takes a lot of homework up front. It takes a lot of engagement. It takes a lot of commitment. But the one thing I always know when I talk about churches and speak with people representing churches, the commitment never fails. It's there. It's always going to be there. Challenges and opportunities. Very good points, very good points. Since we are a close city, First Scots Church in particular, because it involved some new buildings on typical Charleston soils, okay? Those of you who know Charleston, you know half of our area is filled and half of it was original. And who knows when that will stop, okay? But what we encountered on First Scots, we were able to research that the buildings built in the 1950s were in fact on timber piles. Well, when we came up with our design solution for the new building, we too needed a deep foundation. Well, of course, the neighbors expressed great concern about what driving piles might mean to their structures. And I would too if I were a neighbor and had a nice historic building close to that. So the church elected to use auger cast piles for its deep foundation. Rather than pounding piles and the potential risk, they were drilled. And the cages, the reinforcing cages, inserted and filled with grout. It was more expensive. The church made the decision to spend the additional money to be the good neighbor. Materials. This was a steel-framed addition at First Scots. And steel likes to come in long lengths for maximum efficiency. So just bringing the materials to that site was quite difficult, required an awful lot of coordination and timing and keeping the neighbors informed as to when deliveries were going to be made, so it would have the least impact, so that we could move the construction efficiently, but have the least impact on the neighbors. St. Michael's Church and the St. Michael's Alley residents expressed concerns that St. Michael's Alley would be blocked off for some of the construction. And there were concerns, well, what if an ambulance had to get to a resident there, and so forth. So it was worked out that there would be special flagmen when deliveries were made there. We were able to work with a neighbor to utilize an adjacent parking lot to store materials. So a lot of factors come into play when working in downtown Charleston. And it's imperative that they be discussed and fully vetted with the neighbors, not just the person across the fence, but down the street and around the corner, as well as the necessary legal entities.
Any other questions for Jerry while we have him?
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering what
Well, typically the churches have members, or maybe they're on the committees, maybe they are regular congregation members not on the committees, that are members of that neighborhood. So they can help when you disseminate correct information to them to speak to their neighbors about. Of course, with email, everybody communicating by email now, it's a lot easier to send out blasts to neighbors and so forth. At First Scots, some of the members of the committee went door to door. Let's see, what else? First Scots had great opportunities, that's to take Michael, to host presentations for the neighbors. Evening presentations where I would be down there with my boards until I got the magic animation together and so forth. Okay, invite them in. Okay, that dialogue is vital in Charleston. It really is. Did I answer it? Okay. Sir.
You mentioned in the slide with all the groups on it, the authority having jurisdiction.
Isn't that a fancy term?
Yeah, I would think that would be also quite a term. One authority has jurisdiction, which you mentioned under their building code jurisdiction.
Right.
How do you determine who authority is this?
Well, what you do is, excuse me, if it comes to any question dealing with the building code, you contact the Building Inspection Services, because that is the official, the authority having jurisdiction, who can interpret the building code as it applies to a specific instance on your project.
What is the fence? What if it's a fence not attached to wood?
If it's a fence,
Not attached to wood.
okay, then I think you're going to come under BZA site design or perhaps BZA zoning. So Lee Batchelder or Eric Schultz would be the two people. They have the legal authority. I'm an architect and I am prohibited from interpreting, okay? What I do is when I see those questions arise and they come up in the course of a project, I'm the one who likes to go to the official and say, here's the way I read the code, this is how I view I am properly applying it. Tell me, do you agree? Is that correct? And then I'm going to document it because I don't want it to be changed 2 years down the road. We had a project, not in Charleston, but elsewhere, where building officials changed. And the new official looked at my plan and said, oh, you can't do that. I said, respectfully, I can. Here's my documentation of your predecessor's interpretation on an historic structure and how we were providing adequate life safety. And he accepted it in the church before. Sir.
Can you quickly address the extent to which your firm addressed congregations sending out like their own finances, obviously large architectural projects, cost of building expands, visibly contracts at times. To what extent are you involved in that presentation?
What we can do is provide some rough gauges of what other projects have cost, because building costs are quite high. Renovations, historic renovations, very high. And those can be difficult to know until you're kind of far down the road. Sometimes owners have had on their own committees some experienced people within the congregation, experienced in the construction world. Sometimes we have brought on cost consultants as part of our team. You know, the architect is not up there alone. He assembles the team that works for the project. It may include structural, it may include cost consulting, it may include constructability, landscape architects, and so on and so forth, okay? Those other disciplines are a whole lot smarter than I am in their respective disciplines that are part of the project. Cost is always, well, I'll put it this way, cost is the one factor that's common to every single project. The one factor. Did that answer your question, sir?
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you very much.